This is Gemara Pesachim Daf Nun Tes. Tonight's shir is sponsored as a special schos Rafua Shlima for Chaim Ytzchak Moshe ben Aster Reyzel, a good friend and supporter of the Daf, and it's our tefillah that Emirtz Hashem he should have Rafua Shlima bekarev, and he should very soon be learning together with all of us the Chabura back together, hopefully within this parak of Tamin Ishchat very very soon. Of course, the rest of our Chaim Chaim Mamaki the Mimi Nikir Men Vavig Chaim and Shalom Zim Reyzel Sarbas Kenend the Basim Chaim Zegu Shalom Mental the Shavlei Shalom Bas Namim Shavim Shavacham Nitriva, Shmuel ben Tira, Daniel ben Chana Rייזל, Melchai ben Mina, Ali Rachav Asavia Musa, Pesach Sha'ar Chali Israel. Let's pick it up in the bottom of Nun Ches Amid Beis, and similar like we saw way back when at the beginning of the Masechta Berachninas Kanak Ehanim, some of the difficulty in these Kachim, in this Tamin Ishchak Gemaras, are really just a lack of familiarity, as the Chavetz Chaim writes all over. That we have to learn these dinim. Emirtz Hashem, Mashiach should be here. Let's hope right around the corner. So we have to know all these halachas. So it's really just building and getting familiar with all the different concepts, all the different halachas, and just lots of rules. So Emirtz Hashem should come out clear. Let's pick it up in the bottom of Nun Ches Mebeis Tanarabon Tamid the Carbon Tamid. One more second. Here we go. Tanarabon and Tamid Kaidem LePesach. We're going to have the progression of all the different karbanis. Carbon Tamid comes before the Carbon Pesach, like we saw already yesterday in the Mishnah, and that's the reason why we have to allot extra room, and that's why the Carbon Tamid, was brought earlier on Pesach to allow for time for the Carbon Pesach. Pesach Kodim the Keteiris, Pesach is for the Keteiris, the Neiros. That comes before the Halukas of the Neiros, the Menorah, and the Beis HaMikdash, and that is the progression. So we have Tamid, Pesach, Keteiris, Neiros. Now the Gemara explains, how do I know this? Yuchar Davar, it gets delayed, meaning it's later, the item, Shnemer Moi Be'erev, Ubeinar Abayim. The item that says Be'erev and Beinar Abayim comes after L'davar Shleinemer by Be'erev Ella Beinar Abayim. So then it just says Beinar Abayim Bilvad. So then it just says Beinar Abayim. And the top Rashi of here points out that, what are we explaining? We're explaining the Tamid Kaidim LePesach. We're starting at the beginning of the Brisa. How do we know that the Tamid comes before the Pesach? That why? Shir Achar Pesach. Pesach is later, because by Pesach it says Be'erev Ubeinar Abayim She'echachtu Asay Be'erev. The Tamid Shalinemar, and therefore it says Beinar Abayim. Whereas the Carbon Tamid only says Beinar Abayim. So again, the Carbon Pesach says two things: Be'erev and Beinar Abayim. So for that's going to be later after the Carbon Tamid, which just says Beinar Abayim Bilvad. Iachi asks the Gemara 3 lines down. If what you're saying is correct, then the Carbon Pesach should be even after the Keteiros and the Neiros. Why? For the same reason. The Carbon Pesach that says Erev and Beinar Abayim, that double wording, should be after the Beinar Abayim, which is the Neiros and the Keteiros. So why did the Brisa say that the Neiros and the Keteiros come after the Carbon Pesach? Answers the Gemara 6 lines down. Shani Azam Demir Rachmana Oisai. That is different, that the Torah has a special miyat by the halakas and neiros, by the menorah says oisai it. Titania, like we learned in the Brisa. Now we're going to explain this miyat which allows the neiros, which by extension is going to allow the keteiros to be after the Carbon Pesach. Even though one would have thought the Carbon Pesach says erev and beinar abayim, which is the same reason allows it to come after the Carbon Tamid, should perhaps allow it to come after the Keteiros and the Neiros. Explains the Brisa. Me'erev ad boiker, 10 lami dasa. You have to put enough oil into the candle so it burns. Shetehei deilekins, it should be burning me'erev ad boiker from evening until morning. Davar acher, another item. Ein lecha avoida shekeshira me'erev ad boiker. There's no other avoida which is kosher the entire night. Eluzu bilvad. This avoida of the menorah is the only one that is the entire night. My time. Well, what's the reason? Amakra ya'aroicha. So you should arrange it. Aroinu banav Aaron and his children. Me'erev ad boiker. Oisai. So from the word oisai me'erev ad boiker. Ve'ein davar acher me'erev ad boiker. This oisai, the singular, this item that look is the neiros should be the whole night and nothing else. And that's how we're learning that it's the whole night, and therefore it comes after the Carbon Pesach, ve'iskish, Keteiros, the Neiros, and we have a Hekish equating the Keteiros and the Neiros. Therefore, that's the reason why the Keteiros and the Neiros comes after the Carbon Pesach. So again, we have the Carbon Tamid and the Carbon Pesach. Why? Because by Tamid it just says Beinar Abayim. By Carbon Pesach says Erev and Beinar Abayim. So Carbon Pesach comes second. Why is the Neiros, Halakas and Neiros, the Menorah, and the Keteiros after that? Because it says by the Halakas Neiros, Ya'aroich Oisai, and it is the only item that is the whole night. So for that becomes after the Karban Pesach, and the Keteris has a hekish to that. Says the Gemara, V'tanya Kikushin. And in reality, we have a brisa like the question you just suggested. You just had a question which you asked, that really the Keteris and the Neiros should be prior, or should be before the Karban Pesach. There's a brisa that says that. The brisa says, Tamid, Kaidim the Ketairis. Number one is Tamid and Ketairis, Ketairis comes the Neiros, and the Neiros comes the Pesach. So we have a brisa that says, what's the order? Tamid, Ketairis, Neiros, and then Karban Pesach. Clearly, Karban Pesach is after everything. Why? The item that says Erev and Bin Arbayim, the Karban Pesach is after the Davish Lenemro, Bin Arbayim, which is everything else, Bavad, which is the Ketairis, the Tamid, and as well the Halakas and Eris. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? What about the fact that by Halakas and Eris says Aisai, it, which we learned that means the whole night, which we learned that means the Halakas and Eris, and by Hekish extension, the Ketairis should be the entire night, should be after the Pesach. Answers the Gemara, it needs it for different purposes. It comes to exclude the avoida inside, as Rashi explains directly across the Gemara, L'mutei Pesach asa she'avoida is chutz. The Karban Pesach is outside the mistavra the chikom. Amayla avoida is pinim. The kavasam amay we extend it to something like-minded. Says the Gemara, my new ketairis, and that is the ketairis. Now the Gemara says, so I would have thought, since it says Valus Aaronis and Eres ben Arabayim, that Aaron Akayin brings up the candles in the afternoon ben Arabayim, Yakti Renu. Yakti Renu, that being Rabbi Yakti Renu, Ema, I would have thought Nalik Neiros Beresha. First, like the Menorah, Vahadur and Aktir Ketairis, and then bring the Ketairis. Mir Rachmana Oisai, Ella bin Rabbi, and Mir Rachmana Oisai to teach me that no, the Neiros is afterwards. Ella bin Rabbi, Yakti Renu, Lamali, why did the Torah have to tell me that you should do a bin Rabbi? If you're telling me you have a special limit of Oisai, which tells you the Menorah is later, so why did the Torah say bin Rabbi, Yakti Renu? Answers the Gemara, Hachikam, this is what it means as follows: while you're lighting the candles, the ketairis should already have been burned. So that's how it teaches me that the ketairis comes before the lukas neiros, and depending on the brisa, whether the Pesach is going to be before or after. And again, so we just brought down a brisa which concurred with the Havamina that maybe the Karban Pesach should indeed be after everything else, because it says Erev bin Arbayim, whereas everything else it just says Bein Arabayim. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. Continuing the dinim of the Karban Pesach. Ein l'chadavar shekoidem l'tamid shel shachar. Now we go to the morning. There's nothing that comes before the first tamid. Ella keteiris bevad. Only the keteiris. Shenemar ba ba'boiker. It says in it 2 times ba'boiker v'yukdam keteiris. And the keteiris comes early. Davar shenemar ba'boiker. Because it says by it ba'boiker. Dechsev, as it says by the keteiris. Victor Allah Aaron Ketairis Hamim Aboiker. So the item that says Boiker 2 times, the Ketairis, comes before the Davish Never by Ella Boiker Echad, which is the Tamid. And that's the Tamid in the morning. And now the second thing is nothing that comes after the Davish Al Bin Arbayim Ella Ketairis, only the Ketairis Venerais, the Ketairis and the Nerais. And before we continue this price, let's just understand what just happened. What just happened was we just learned that a din that the tamid is first in the morning, aside for the ketairis that is prior, and the tamid is last at night, aside for the ketairis which is after. Now the Gemara just continues in the price and says, what other items l'maisa go after the tamid? So it was the ketairis, it was halakas and neiros, like we've seen already. Then it was the Pesach, the Pesach, and now the price adds on a few more items which we're going to discuss right now. And someone who's lacking al kapara, someone who's tamein, he needs to bring the appropriate karbanis to get the kaparas who can eat the Karban Pesach and Erev Pesach. That person's carbon will also be brought after the tamid. Shetayvel Sheni said already went to the mikvah a second time, and then Vaychles Pesach L'Erev will be able to eat his Karban Pesach at night. Just one nikuda, one point we see over here the chashivas of 2 things: the tamid and the ketairis. Tamid is first, tamid is last. Ketairis is before the morning and after the night. Which obviously this is where it comes from that we say the Karban tamid every single morning. It's one of the things that even when we have no time, one should make sure, because it's a din. And as we always know, is that not only is saying the tefillah as if you brought it, but now that we're learning about the Karban tamid, so if you say the Karban tamid and we're actually learning about the Karban tamid, says the Chavetz Chaim, that is the highest level. That makes it as if you actually brought the Talmud and you know all about the dinim, etc. Let's continue in the Gemara. That was the Bryce again, Tamid in the morning, Tamid at night, Ketayres pre and post. Now the second Bryce ended off, that after the afternoon Tamid, what comes after it? The Ketayres and the Menaira, the Pesach and Mechusar Kippurim. So that Mechusar Kippurim is what we're going to be discussing right now. Rabbi Shmuel ben Aisha Merichem and Braika Oimer Av Mechusar Kippurim Bishar Yimais Hashana. Meaning, the Bryce said someone who's lacking Kapara on Erev Pesach, because he wants to eat the carbon Pesach. They don't bring his carbon right now. He's not going to be allowed to eat the carbon Pesach. So says the Raisa, even after the Talmud, normally you don't bring anything after the Talmud. But after the Talmud, you can bring this person's carbon so he can eat the carbon Pesach. Now, says Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshmer, no, at any day of the year, someone who's lacking kapara could bring his carbon after the carbon Talmud, so he can eat any carbon. Says the Gemara, it's very good according to the verse Tana. We already learned that it's an asay, hashlama. The Talmud has to be last. That's an asay. It's a biblical din. So I understand when it comes to the carbon Pesach, that's an asay with karis. That's supercharged. So I understand that comes after. But a regular asay, a regular carbon, how could that come after the Talmud? Says the Gemara, Elul, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aisha ben Braika, finishing off the question, my olmei the hayasay me hayasay. What's the reason a regular asay of a regular carbon is going to be allowed to be daicha and push away the asay of doing the carbon Talmud last? Answers the Gemara, Amar Ravina, Amar Achista, Hacha B'Chatas Askin. A bunch of truths. First, Eretz says again, we're trying to figure out what is the reason you're allowed to bring a carbon after the carbon Talmud. We already learned it's a din in the Torah. It's an asay, hashlama. Hashleim Aleha, that the carbon Talmud has to be last. So we're figuring out why would you be allowed to bring a carbon afterwards. We said he's Mechusar Kippurim, he needs to get a kapara. He can't eat from carbonates without the kapara. I hear, very nice. I feel bad. You can't eat your carbon, but it's a din asay. It's a biblical din. You can't eat after your Talmud. First, Eretz comes along Ravina and Rav Chisda and says as follows: with the chatas of a bird that watch in the mizbeach al dama, you only put the blood in the mizbeach. And therefore, that's the reason why it's not a real hakrava. You're not doing an actual carbon after the carbon Talmud. Rather, you're just putting the dam there. You're not actually burning an animal on the mizbeach. And therefore, maybe that's the answer number one, why you're allowed to do it after the Talmud, because you're not really dealing with kachim in the mizbeach. You're just putting the blood there. Teretz number one of Ravina Rav Chisda. Teretz number two, Rav Abba Amar. To regular chatos. So why are you allowed to do it after the Talmud? Ma'ala, what do? Is you bring up the carbon, umalina and you put it on top, and you let it sleep overnight on top of the mizbeach, and therefore what? And the din is, anything on the mizbeach doesn't become nicer. It's like the mizbeach saves it, so even though normally you have to eat the carbon right away, you leave it on top of the mizbeach, it doesn't become nicer, and therefore tomorrow you'll be able to burn the carbon. But the point is, we think right now that this person who's lacking his kapara will be able to have brought his carbon, and then bring up the carbon after the Talmud, but since you're not doing an actual burning of the carbon, just letting it sit on the mizbeach, the Gemara thinks right now that would be allowed even after the Talmud, even though there's a din asay to do nothing after the Talmud. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? Vayika asham. But every carbon, what are we talking about over here? We're talking about chatas behema, talking about a mitzayra. But the mitzayra also has to bring an asham. And therefore, how you let it bring that carbon asham after the Talmud is brought? Again, I understand. That's according to Rapapa. What do you do with the asham? The same din. You bring up the animal, you put on top of the mizbeach. You don't actually burn it. So if it's not called doing an avodah, and then it will stay there and won't become nicer. El Rav Chisda, Michael Meimar. What are you going to say according to Rav Chisda? Rav Chisda's whole teretz was talking about a chatas ha'oif, a bird. Then all you do is take the blood and put it on the mizbeach. But over here, it's not a bird; it's a regular animal. It's regular asham. It answers the Gemara: Amri shekarav ashamai. Say he already brought the asham prior, meaning the asham was brought before the Talmud, and now it's only his carbon chatas ha'oif. The bird is the only thing that's being brought after the Talmud. Ask the Gemara: what do you mean? Vayika ayla. Every mitzayra also has to bring a carbon ayla. Even if you're going to tell me ayla loy ma'akva, maybe maybe he doesn't actually bring the oila, and it's not ma'akiv, meaning he can get the kapara without the oila, and he'll be allowed to eat from karbanos. Vatani the brayta says, just like the chatzas and ashen is ma'akiv, the oila is also ma'akiv. So what are you going to do with the oila? Again, we're back to square one. How do you have a carbon that's allowed to be brought after the tamid? Tema says the Gemara 6 lines on the bottom. Maybe you'll tell me b'shekarva oilasai. You already brought the oila prior, like we tried to say before. You can't do that. And of course, we're picking up all these glimpses of dinim. We never knew when you bring the oila, bring the chatas. What's going on? Says the Gemara, you can't bring in the oila before a chatas. Says the Gemara, mikarva oilasai koydem chatasai rishon. You can't do that. Vartani, it says in the braysa. Vikr says asher lachatas rishon. Ma tam aloymar im lelami. You know that teaches me shetekoydem es la oila. Teaches me that the chatas has to come first. So if you didn't bring the chatas yet, because that's how this whole party began, that we said you brought the chatas ha'oif, you brought the chatas behema, so what are you going to do with the oila? Harikvar nemar, answers the Gemara, I'm sorry, matam loimer im lalamid sheikoyim es oila. Harikvar nemar, v'sasheni yaseh oila, kimishpat. Ella, says the Gemara, zeh binyan av. This is a binyan av to teach me the what? L'chol chatas. For all carbon chatas, sheikoyim es l'chol oilas. Says the Gemara, the chatas has to bring before the oila v'oisimayim. V'kayim alon, Da'afilu, and not only does the chatas have to be first, da'afilu chatas ha'oif koydem es loilas behema. So we're stuck in a pickle. What's going on over here? At the end of the day, how are you having a case that you're allowed to bring the carbon after the tamid, and how you can be allowed to bring the oila? Amar Rava shiny oilas mitzayra. This oila is different. You're right. All other oilas have to be brought prior. All other oilas have to be brought with the chatas. This oila is going to be different. The oila of the mitzayra d'achmana amar ve'e'ela, and it should be brought up as we move over to Nantesim and Beis. A special din by the oila of the Mitzayra. It's going to be allowed to have been brought prior, and therefore we're going to have to say the case was you brought the oila before the tamid, and now after the tamid you're just dealing with the chatas, and that's when you leave the chatas oif, you pour on the blood, or the chatas beima according to the second teretz. Omar li Rav Shemin bar Abba the Rabba says Rav Shemin bar Abba the Rabba. Okay, let's go back into this last discussion that we just had. According to Darmin and Maleh, Umalina Braysham Mizbech. What was Rav Papa's teretz? Rav Papa said we could even be talking about a chatas of what? A real animal. Again, the first teretz was Rav Chista, they're talking about a chatas of a bird. The bird, you don't actually do any akrav on the Mizbeach. What do? You just put the blood there, and therefore it's not going to be any problem doing that after the carbon tummy. Rav Papa came along and said, no, we're talking about even a chatas of a what? Of a behema. So what are you going to do with that? We said, no, you take the animal, you bring it up to the Mizbeach, you leave it there, and since it's sitting on the Mizbeach, it doesn't become nicer, but it's not considered an actual avodah of the mizbeach, and that's the reason why you're going to be allowed to do it after the carbon tamid. Ask the Gemara, according to you that you just said malam and mizbeach, they allowed to put the animal on top of the mizbeach. Kaimin v'avdinan milsa kayhanim. Is that true? Will we do something? Will we potentially put the Kehanim in such a precarious situation? Meaning what? What happens? What do the Kehanim do all night? They sit there burning all the extra fats and limbs, all the stuff of the Mizbeach. So they're going to have sitting there this chatas. This chatas. Excuse me, this chatas is going to be sitting on top of the Mizbeach. This chatas is sitting on top of the Mizbeach. And it's like a do not touch sign. You don't touch this chatas because you're not going to burn it till tomorrow. What do you mean the Kohanim could potentially come to a michshol that while they're burning everything, they might come to burn that? So you, Reb Papa, how do you allow the Kohanim just to leave the animal sitting up there? Answers the Gemara. Again, one more time. They're going to think it's its day, and the Kohanim are going to come to burn it. So how are you allowed to put the Kohanim in such a bad situation? Rav Papa responds, Kohanim's reasoning, a good important rule we'll see many times. Kohanim are very zaris, therefore we don't have to be concerned that they're going to come to make mistakes. Amalei Rav Ashi, the Rav Kahana, says Rav Ashi, the Rav Kahana, Rav Huna, Brei, Rav Nasan, Rav Papa, V'kamad Miskatri. 1 second. What's your whole shticker of Papa? You Rav Papa said what? Again, let's remind yourselves. Quick chazara. We had a carbon tamid. We said that what after the carbon tamid, if you're a mechusar kapara, if you're lacking in kapara, you need to eat karbanos. So on Pesach, for sure, you could bring your carbon so you can eat the carbon Pesach. That's the assay of the Pesach with the kares, which is the regular assay of not being allowed to do malacha after the carbon tamid. But what about throughout the rest of the year? You regular mechusar kapara. You need a kapara. You want to bring a carbon so you can eat kachim. Are you allowed to do that after the tamid? Says the Gemara. yes. Do terutzimoi. Says the Rav Chisda talking about a nazir. We're talking about the chatas oif. I'm sorry, that's just a blood. It's not actual carbon on the mizbeach. Said Rav Papa, the chatas behemo. It's a real carbon. It's a real animal brought up on the mizbeach. How are you allowed to do that after the Talmud? Answer Rav Papa, you're not doing anything. You just bring up the animal. You're sitting on top of the mizbeach, and it's going to sit there. It won't turn nicer because it's on top of the mizbeach. But you're not actually bringing it up as a carbon. Says the Gemara. 1 second. What did you gain if you didn't actually bring up the animal as a carbon? Then what? As long as you didn't burn the emurim, the halacha is the kehanim only eat their portion after God gets his portion. After you burn the emurim on the mizbeach, that's when the kehanim eat their flesh. Therefore, what? The Tanya like we learned in a Raysa. You would have thought the kehanim allowed to eat their portion before the burning of the emurim. Damalaimer says the Torah, Victor Hakayin is chilav mizbeach v'hadra, and then the Torah says vayachazal aron l'banav. And therefore we learned that the kehanim can only eat after the mizbeach eats. And therefore what? The kehanim layachli basar, and the halacha is as long as the kehanim did not eat the flesh, bailam lemischapri, the bailam don't get their kapara. Again, the whole reason this party started was because we want to get the bailam their kapara. They want to eat a carbon at night, and that's what we said. You can be allowed to bring this after the Talmud. It says Rav Papa, don't actually bring the animal. Take the animal, put it on top of the mizbeach. Ask the Gemara, if the animal was sitting on top of the mizbeach, what are you gaining? Because the bailam do not get their kapara yet, because they only get their kapara after the kehanim keep it. The kehanim cannot eat until the animal is burnt on the mizbeach. The tiny, like we learned in a brayso, v'achlu oisam asher kapar brehem melami shekehanim oichlenu bailam ischapri, and that's what they get the kapara. So back to the question around Papa, what does it help to do what you're doing? Amar lei response, given to lei sure, there's no choice. You have no other potential, because since the carbon tamid was already brought, you cannot burn the emurim. And in a situation of lei sure, of impossibility, then the halacha is, it's considered as if it became tamid or a loss. The Tanya like learned in a brayso. You would have thought, maybe if the carbon becomes tummy, maybe the kehanim lose out. They don't get their portion, because God didn't get his portion. Talmud Leimar says in the Torah, Mikol Makayim, they get it in all cases. And therefore, says the Gemara, since this case is impossible, we make it as if it's tummy. In the case of tummy, then the kehanim could eat. The kehanim could eat even before it's burnt to the mizbeach. So in this case, the kehanim will eat. Once the kehanim will eat, the bailim will get their kapara. And therefore, says the Gemara, Rav Papa is resolved. And that is how Rav Papa is going to learn that the animal is chatos of a behema that you brought on top of the mizbeach. You leave it there so it doesn't become nicer, it doesn't become aser. Are the kehanim allowed to eat? They didn't burn the emur, and the answer is yes, because it's an impossibility. Once the kehanim eat, now the bailim will get their kapara, and therefore they'll be allowed to eat the karbanas like they wanted. Now today we're going to finish off to the Mishnah with 2 or 3 more stiras in the dinim that we just discussed. Rav Kahana asked the following stira. It says in the Torah, don't leave over the chelev of the karbanis of the yantiv until the morning. Ad boiker who's layalin, don't leave it over to the morning. Hakol layla kula yalin. We see that it's allowed to stay over the whole night. Uksev and a different pasuk says, Victor love chal ve'ashlamim, and you're allowed to serve. You bring up as a karban the chelev of the karban shlamim. Oleo hashleim kolar karbanais kulam. That was the drush that we saw. That teaches me that the tamid is last. So what do we see? On one hand, you just told me the tamid is last. On the other hand, the pasuk in the chalev chagi ad boiker, they allowed to bring the chelev of the karbanais the entire night. He asked the question, he answered it. The answer is when it is left over. Meaning, really they brought the carbon before the tamid, but then there were some fats left over. That's when this brisa says those fats could be burnt the whole night. Is that a steer to an animal not being allowed to be brought after the carbon tamid? Of course not. Tamid is going to be last. This is the case with the animal was brought prior. There's some leftover fats. Those fats could be burnt the entire night. Ramilei Rav Safar has a similar steer. Rav Ksiv, it says in the Torah of Layalin La Boiker Zevach Chag HaPesach. Layalin La Boiker. You cannot leave over to the morning Zevach Chag HaPesach, the animal of the Karban Pesach. La Boiker who's Layalin Salah stayed over to the morning. Okola Layalin. But what do we see that the Karban Pesach is allowed to be the entire night? But Ksiv, a different pasuk says Oyla Shabbos B'Shabbat Oyla Schol B'Shabbos. That what is Oyla Shabbos B'Shabbat? The carbon oil is brought on Shabbos, and from there we learn out, and not the carbon during the week. It can be brought on Shabbos. Oyla Schol B'Yantif, nor carbon during the week we brought on Yantif. So what's the steer? The steer is you just told me that it says L'Yol L'Boiker Zevach Chag HaPesach LaBoiker, which we learned out that the carbon Pesach is out to be burnt the entire night. 1 second. When was the Pesach brought? When was the carbon Hukarav? On Erev Yantif on the 14th. So that's the case of Oyla Schol. It's a carbon during the week, during the day, beyontif, and you're telling me at night you're allowed to burn the fats of the carbon Pesach. How's that possible? We learned up in the Torah that if it's brought during the day, you can't burn it at night. Answers the Gemara. He already asked this question of Rav Avua, and he answered, we're talking about when the 14th falls on Shabbos, like this year, Pesach is on Shabbos, so they shechted the animal on Shabbos, and then a special din, the Chalbi Shabbos, Krivim B'Yantiv. The fats of Shabbos are, yes, allowed to be brought in Yantiv, therefore Matzei Shabbos allowed to be brought when it's Yantiv already. Amar Lei Mishav, the Chalbi Shabbos, Krivim B'Yantiv. Anat nekom v'nemalei. Anat nekom. So what are we going to say? Anat nekom v'nemalei. The high grab arba aser shchalios b'Shabbos. Who the kasiv? Amar lei. Meaning, are you going to? It's a seemingly a difficult teretz. You're going to say that the whole Bryce was talking about this one convoluted case. Amar lei. Yeah, we have no choice. Shavke likra du dachik u'maiken hashay. The Pesachim themselves are difficult, so the Pesachim themselves lead us to have to be forced to say that this is the case. So the case is going to be what? The case is going to be when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos. Therefore, there's no problem. The whole question was, you're not allowed to burn a regular carbon that was brought during the weekday. It's fat. You're not going to be allowed to burn on Yontif. Over here, that's not the case. It's the case of the carbon that's brought on Shabbos. And on Shabbos, the fats are allowed to, yes, be burnt on Yontif, which is going to be Matzei Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, we finished through the first Mishnah of Tam Nishchat, Mirt Hashem, throughout the rest of Kachim. We'll pick up for the Mishnah tomorrow.